Gabinete 36 na Legislature in Guam is back in session. We're back on the second reading, but we are lacking a quorum right now, so we will recess until we have a quorum. Ministro Anticisna Legislature in Guam is back from recess. We're back on second reading on Bill 230-36 LS. Senator San Augustine, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to accept Bill number 230-36 LS as amended by the Committee on General Government Operation, Appropriation, and Housing, and substituted on the floor. Introduced by the Committee on Rules by request of the Magahaga Guam, the Governor of Guam, in accordance with Organic Act of Guam, an act to add a new Article 13.3 to Chapter 1, Title 5, Guam Code Annotated, relative to amending the implementation plan for payments for Guam World War II claims to claimants who failed to meet the one-year filing deadline under U.S. Public Law 114-328.
On the motion to accept Bill number 230-36 LS as amended by the committee and substituted on the floor, are there any objections? Seeing no objection, motion carries. Senator San Augustine, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to resolve into the Committee of the Whole for the purpose of deliberating Bill 230-36 LS as amended by the Committee on General Government Operation, Appropriation, and Housing, and substituted on the floor, and that I chair the Committee of the Whole and invite the following. I will be inviting the Department of Administration will be here to address any concerns of my colleagues.
On that motion to deliberate Bill number 230-36 in the Committee of the Whole and to bring in Director Byrne and Department of Administration for our panel, is there any objection? Hearing no objection, we will resolve into Committee of the Whole. We will take a 2-minute recess just to readjust.
Committee of the Whole is called to order. Colleagues, we are here. I'm going to read the rules of engagement for the Committee of the Whole. Materials for the Committee of the Whole are in shared session, Google Drive, folder label 1.24.22. Committee of the Whole proposed amendment must be submitted in writing to the clerk via email 36glsession@gmail.com. Amendments not in writing will be called out of order. Rules of engagement. There will be 3 rounds for discussion. We have 2 rounds of questions for the panel, with each senator allotted 5 minutes for questions, not including responses. Time to speak may not be used from more than one member to another. A member who used that member's time on a question use all the member's time on that question and may not later speak, even if all the time used was not used. At the completion of the 2 rounds of questions, panelists will be excused. The panel will be excused, and the 3rd round is for amendments or comments on the bill that we are discussing. I'd like to now at this point recognize Mr. Ed Byrne, the Director of the Department of Administration, and I'll ask the Sergeant at Arms to please swear in Mr. Byrne.
Please raise your right hand. Under penalty of perjury, do you affirm that any and all information that you provide today, whether it be verbally, electronically, and in writing, be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Yes, Mr. Chair, he's under oath. You may proceed.
Thank you, Sergeant at Arms. My colleagues, I will have Mr. Byrne talk about the bill. It originated from the governor's office, from the governor. And we did have a public hearing on this bill. And that I honestly believe that most, if not all, of the recommended amendments were placed on the substitute version, or amended and substitute version. But I'd ask Mr. Byrne to please give us talk about the bill, Bill 230. Sir, Mr. Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill, as the chairman says, was originally introduced by the governor. It fulfills an undertaking that she made that those who missed, in particular, who missed the date for registering their claim under the federal procedure should not be forgotten and should be entitled to make a claim locally and therefore not be at a disadvantage with others who did make a claim timely. There are some differences from the original draft that the governor sent. Those changes that you see before you generally reflect the discussions that we had during the hearing and recognize some of the concerns that senators brought up and make clear some of the areas where clarity were needed. There were 2 really important areas that have been included into this bill that you see before you today. We wanted to make sure that the decision-taking body, it was clear that the decision-taking body is the Adjudication Committee, that DOA, as the administering department, carries out the mandates and decisions of the adjudicating committee, but that DOA will be responsible for the administration of these claims. And that means, if I can expand on that, that means taking in the claims. And during the hearing, I did put a note that when we received some claims under the prior war claims process, some of those claims were missing information or had information that was contradictory within the submission. And DOA would want to make sure that at the point of intake, that those errors or omissions are corrected. It's not involved in taking a decision, it's involved in making sure that the claimant, when the claim is submitted to the committee, is in the best state possible. And in doing that, we're really following the process that the staff of the Foreign Sales Settlement Commission do also. The commission takes the decision, but the staff of the commission make sure that everything, especially the words that you're going to make sure that are in the law, are adhered to. The other area where there is clarity is on the confidentiality. It is important, just as it is under the federal procedure, that confidentiality is maintained. DOA, I'm happy to say, is used to maintaining confidentiality. It has to maintain confidentiality in a number of areas. And in this area, which is particularly sensitive, it will be mandated to maintain that confidentiality too. DOA obviously consists of a number of different divisions, and it has to move from the Benefits Department, which is the department that is responsible for the intake, through the process, and eventually when the claim is mature for payment, the accounting department will make that payment. But all such departments will maintain the confidentiality so that claimants should not be embarrassed. And I know this is a very emotional area, and we want to respect the feelings of these claimants. There are some areas where disclosure will be required, should it be necessary. There is this legislature. There is obviously the public auditor who is responsible for making sure that we comply with legal mandates. And of course, should it be required under a legal proceeding by a court of law, we would be required to disclose it at that time. I believe that the wording that you see before you certainly captures, I know that at that time I was off island and staring down the computer at different times of the day, but I believe it captures the spirit of what was discussed. The amendments that were being discussed, but obviously you're open to make further amendments as you discuss this bill and debate this bill as you require. But I believe we've captured the very important ones that you mentioned. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Byrne. We'll now begin the first round of questions to the panel, Mr. Byrne, and we'll begin with Senator Tello-Tadiwi. Do you have any question of Mr. Byrne?
Sijus Masi, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity. Mr. Byrne, the way I'm reading this right now, on page 7, section 13.306, funding source for payment of claims, and it says section B, upon full expenditure of such funds, section A of this section, the sum of $10 million is hereby appropriated from the general fund to the Department of Administration for payment of claims approved from the Adjudication Committee and certified by the chairperson. Mr. Burns, the bill that was passed, the first original bill that was passed, and then Public Law 36-62 that was recently passed to correct an error that was made. In those two legislations, it gives the authority for the governor to use her transfer authority to pay for these claims. The way you're reading this bill right now, it kind of changes that, because it doesn't say transfer authority, it says to the general fund. How do you interpret that, and how do you expect to find this $10 million through the governor's transfer authority as originally from the bill, or is there a plan with the administration to maybe wait for Section 30 money like all the other claimants that were paid for from Section 30 money?
Thank you, Senator. The Governor's Transfer Authority is, in my estimation, a different animal. The Governor's Transfer Authority relates to a transfer of a sum of money from one appropriation to another. It doesn't contemplate funding from other sources. It's just you start off with whatever the budget number is from the Budget Act, and transfers money from one appropriation to another. This is a different provision. This, as I hope that I adequately explained during the public hearings, this appropriates money from the general fund directly. When asked, I explained that the principal source of funds for payment of these amounts would come from the general fund, in that there was expected to be, and there still is expected to be, an eventual surplus for the year that we've just ended, and also from revenues that we are realizing in fiscal 22. And I think you've had sight of the latest CRAR, which was issued, I believe, on Friday, that suggested that we were going to exceed appropriated revenues by something like 50 million for this current financial year.
So you plan on using general fund money, so you plan on using what, surplus money? Is that, because this bill does not say to use surplus money. Mr. Byrne, I had a letter that was sent to the Attorney General's office recently in question and about surplus, any excess revenue or surplus. And it clearly states in his opinion, which I'm trying to pull up here right now, basically says that the governor cannot touch any of the surplus money. And so if you plan on using this excess revenue, you need appropriation from the legislature to literally take that funding. This just says general fund. It doesn't say where it's coming from. So that's why I'm a bit confused. I mean, so if you can.
If I may, I'm
Sure.
a little confused by what you just said. I haven't had sight of the Attorney General's letter, but the word appropriated is in this paragraph here. So if that's what the Attorney General was referring to, I think we're complying with what he just said.
Okay, Mr. Chair, if I may, because this is very important, I received this letter from the Attorney General's office on January 14, 2022, discussing clearly the funding source in the budget bill, the current budget bill, as well as excess revenue for FY21. And if I can share this with the body, and as well, I'll send it to the clerks and then have one printed out for Mr. Burns to look at before we move on, just so that he knows where we're at. Because if the language, based on the Attorney General's opinion, we'll just break for a minute. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we'll take a few-minute recess while we get that circulated. Thank you. Committee of the Whole is called back to order. Senator Tello, do you have anything else you wanted to talk about?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity. And Mr. Burns, you have a copy. You had an opportunity to read through it, and you had an opportunity to read that according to the Attorney General, that it's the legislature that has to approach any excess revenue, and it also shows that 70% of this excess revenue has already been obligated to go into the tax refund and 30% into the rainy day fund. What is your interpretation of this letter and the ability for what you're able to do, or the governor is able to do, according to your cursory review?
Well, Senator, in answer to your earlier question about what the governor could do with transfer authority, I indicated that I didn't think this was an appropriate way in which to operate the transfer authority. If I could just take 2 minutes to talk about budgets, it would be extraordinary if revenues and expenditures were exactly the same in a large enterprise like the island of Guam.
Mr. Burns, before you do that, can you please explain the letter and your interpretation of what this letter?
I think what I'm about to say will help you to get there, or help me to get there. So budgets is exactly what it says. It's a budget. This letter relates to how the administration should administer a budget once it's passed by this legislature. It says in the middle of page 2, or towards two-thirds of the way down page 2, that the Magahagan Guahan shall not expend general fund revenues collected in excess of the adopted revenues as the basis for appropriations contained in Public Law 3599, and this act without legislative appropriation authorizing the expenditure of such excess funds. And the last paragraph says, it is clear that the legislature holds the power of appropriation, which encompasses the principle that it is for the legislature to determine which social objectives or programs are worthy of pursuit. The bill which you see in front of you, in my view, does just that. This legislature holds the power of appropriation. The word appropriation is used in section 13.306, if the legislature passes this bill, it will have determined that this program is worthy of pursuit. It actually goes, the bill actually goes on to say that the funds appropriated under this section shall not lapse and shall continue to be available until fully expended. Therefore, in my mind, this bill follows an appropriation path, just as the Attorney General has set out in this letter.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. But Mr. Burns, it also says that 70% to 30% of any excess revenue has already been appropriated, one into the tax refund and the other into the rainy day. So how is there any excess revenue if it's already been 20 million of it has already put into tax refunds, and then the leftover 70% and 30% has already been obligated? So how can she use any of that funding?
Well, Senator, it doesn't say, what it says is nothing shall prevent Imagahakan Guam from making such deposits into the rainy day fund as necessary. It doesn't say it has to. But even if it did, I don't know, this legislature has the authority.
It says shall be deposited into the rainy day fund. It says shall.
Well, when I'm reading it says nothing shall prevent. But this body can take whatever decision it feels like making, and if it appropriates money from the general fund, and like I've mentioned before, the general fund is the general fund. That's why it's called the general fund. Everything that isn't dealt with in another fund is dealt with in the general fund. So whatever shortfalls and surpluses occur in other funds eventually falls through to the general fund. This is the source of the funding. This bill makes that appropriation.
Senator Tello, do you have anything else you wanted to ask?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I thought you were talking with them. Okay, no, the other thing is that the Attorney General clearly says that any excess revenue shall be deposited into the tax refund 70% and 30%. In the event if this bill passes and you were to follow what the Attorney General has stated here, how would you be able to pay for the 10 million?
Through the appropriation which you're about to make.
Yeah, but what are you going to use?
The general fund money that is being appropriated.
The excess 62 million you're claiming?
I'm not claiming any money, any particular sum of money. I went through that in the hearing. But this legislature can, shall all excess, provided that all excess revenue referenced herein, this is the last phrase of that paragraph, all excess revenue referenced herein shall be subject to legislative appropriation. And that's what this bill does, I believe.
Only after the budget law that's been passed, you have to act on those requirements by law, which is 70-30, to be appropriated. Before I lose my time, you even mentioned not you did, but BBMR mentioned in Bill 218, when they were doing fiscal note with regards to the x-ray machines, they were talking about how, and your discussion about how this money has already been spent, the 62, if we were to have this bill, which is 15 million, and then it says 62 million minus 20 million for tax refunds, and then minus 25 for the LEAP fund, and okay, I'm out of time, but it's ironic how you have like this laundry list using excess revenue when it's clearly Attorney General's opinion says you have no authority to use that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Tello. Senator Frank, do you have any comments or questions you would like to ask Mr. Byrne?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sure we're going to go back to the funding source and everything, but there are other things that I'd like to be able to question before we get to that. Mr. Byrne, if you go to page 3, basically in the subsection 13.302, payments for certified Guam World War II claimants. Line 19, it says certification from the chairman of the Adjudication Committee. Who comprises the Adjudication Committee?
My understanding, Senator, is that there are 5 members of the Adjudication Committee.
And who may they be?
I beg your pardon?
Who would those individuals be?
I don't know the names. I believe that they're appointed by the governor.
Okay, just because I'm looking at the bill here and I'm seeing, because then next question I have, if you can jump to page 7, okay, under 13.305, appeals, objections and appeals of decisions of the Adjudication Committee shall be to the committee. See, the reason why I'm asking as to who the Adjudication Committee is then who is the committee here?
The question, if I may, that you are asking about whether the Adjudication Committee can hear an appeal of its own decision came up at the hearing. And I think it was decided at that time that the Adjudication Committee was the appropriate body to make the final decision, as is the case with the Foreign Claims Settlement Commission.
Is there...
Senator Blas, we'll take a quick recess and let's do a little research on the bill that created this bill to get an answer on the Adjudication Committee. I think that needs to be resolved first.
Yes, because
Okay,
then
so
it
let's
has to
take a
resolve
quick
on the other one,
recess
too.
and we'll get that research done real quick. Thank you.
Thank you.
Recess for a few minutes. The committee of the whole is called back to order. Senator Blas, you have a copy of the provisional public law that was passed. It identifies the adjudication committee. Once they're all appointed, then I guess Mr. Byrne will know who they are. Otherwise, they're just positions that needs to be appointed, that have not been appointed yet.
So I think, Mr. Chair, and it would behoove that there's an amendment to this, and that'll be done, I guess, in the third round, so that we can delineate as to who these committee members are. It's one thing to say that it's one law, but if it's not in this, I just don't want it to be changed. And then the second thing is, again, going back to my recent question, on the objections and appeals of decisions of the adjudication committee, it looks like there's missing a couple words here, and that'll be dealt with in the third round. It shall be referred back, but we'll deal with that in the third round.
Thank you, sir. Do you have any other questions?
One more.
One more. Okay, sir.
Okay, page 5, line 18, section 13, 303, filing period for claims and notice. So what we're saying here is the filing period, once this goes into effect, just for clarification, we got 1 year from the date of enactment, 12 months, right? So it's 1 year for the filing period? Is this what, Mr. Burns?
Claimants have 1 year to make a claim, that's my understanding.
Okay. So you got 1 year to be able to do this. I just want, as points of clarification on this, thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I think that's it for now. I could save the others for round 2.
Thank you, sir. Senator Pito Terlais, you have any questions, sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to bring this up as a matter of concern about the eligibility of for individuals that are making the claimants that did not file in June 2018, and I guess the majority of the claimants or most of the claimants that are making this claim did not meet that date, the June 2018. And I was talking to the chairman, and I just wanted to be sure that the issue on eligibility, once we pass, I guess, Bill 2030-36 LS, I guess those people that missed the date, the deadline, are eligible are eligible for the compensation, right?
Yes, Senator, that's my understanding.
Okay, there's some issues regarding, claimants making claims because their son got killed, their parents got killed, situations like that. So I would think that maybe Bill 230-36 LS did address some of those issues, in which they will be eligible to claim for their disease.
Yes, Senator, the requirements in this bill are fairly well laid out.
Yeah,
Okay.
Because in the rest of the pages that I'm reading is that those issues that initially cannot be claimed as eligibility, this Bill 230-36 LS made it applicable or eligible for these claimants.
Yes, it establishes a compensable Guam victim.
Okay.
Those are the people.
I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you very much, Mr. Byrne.
Anything else, Senator Terlai? That's it? Okay, thank you.
That's it, Mr. Chair, thank you.
All right, Senator Clinton, do you have any question for Mr. Byrne? None? Senator Tony Abbott, do you have any question?
Yes, Mr. Chair, if I can just take a second here, thank you. Mr. Byrne, Director Byrne, on the 13306, the funding source again, how much is in that current account that is listed here on, under subsection A?
What was the question?
Yes, I didn't understand the question, Senator.
How much is in this account? The Guam Liberation War Claims Fund.
There's nothing in that account.
There's zero in that account.
Correct.
So then on section B, it says that $10 million is hereby appropriated from the general fund to the Department of Administration for payment of claims. Why are we appropriating it to Department of Administration and not into the Guam Liberation War Claims Fund?
You could, but the Department of Administration, you'd have to then make the Department of Administration responsible for the payment. I think it's simply because the B relates to the general fund, and it just follows a budget provision. But that's up to you.
Because I know in the previous section on the Guam war claims, that this shall only be used for payment of claims under that section. So perhaps maybe what we need to do is ensure that all the funds that are transferred to the department shall be only used for the payment of claims.
Senator, there's also a provision for administrative costs elsewhere.
Yeah,
$500,000 is for administrative costs. So some of it will be used for administrative costs.
Yeah,
not
so then
claims.
if we're appropriating $10 million, what is the amount of, or the approximate amount of payment that is remaining? About $10 million, right?
From what, Senator?
For those that still need to file claims. I think they were talking about over 700 people that still need to file, and about
Yes.
$10 million was the approximate number.
Yes, the BBMR fiscal note indicated that in their estimation there was about 700 people, and that's what led to this 10 million being calculated.
So then, is anyone going to be shorted knowing that 500,000 from this $10 million will be paid out to Department of Administration for the administrative fees?
We really don't know, Senator, until we get the claims coming in. I think the 700 was an estimate. That's something we will have to see.
The Department of Administration has done this previously, right? When we paid out the war claims locally.
Yes, Senator.
So already there's a process in place for payment of war claims, right?
Well, we paid the war claims mimicking the federal procedure, yes.
Did you guys receive any funding for administrative costs?
No, Senator, we didn't.
So now you want funding for administrative costs?
Yes, we've learned. Department of Administration and Department of Revenue Taxation have both learned that these additional tasks very often require additional people or additional equipment. And so in this case, we're asking for some help with administration.
I see. Thank you, Director Byrne. Mr. Chairman, that's the only questions I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Brown, do you have any question for Mr. Byrne?
Where do we even begin, Mr. Chairman? I do have to point out, because I don't, the fact that we're here discussing this issue of appropriating from the general fund, as you know, Mr. Chair, I've repeatedly brought this up, to me is problematic. I don't know how you properly recognize the suffering of our people, and certainly the remaining ones that are still with us that lived through and suffered through the war, in wanting to compensate them, because certainly the timeline provided by the federal government was relatively short considering how many years it took to get to where we were. And I think that's what we need to look at, because I mean, I certainly want to see them compensated, but at the same time, you know, we spent a lot of time doing the budget where we wanted to make sure that any additional funds that were remaining or additional revenue would go to setting aside funds for the rainy day fund, and more importantly also go to paying the tax refunds. I know the speaker was very adamant in pursuing that. So the question is, where is the money going to come from? And I think that's the bigger challenge, is how do we make it appear? Last month we were here, you know, approving $25 million for the LEAP program. Some negotiation happened somehow, somewhere between some members of the Guam Legislature and the administration that they would put forth $25 million out of the federal money, but yet the legislature needed to put money out as well through the general fund and allow the governor flexibility and transfer authority to come up with that additional amount. And then, much to our surprise, many of us heard, you know, a week ago that the governor announced again on her own authority and the continued generation of executive orders, since we become the government of executive orders these days, that, you know, she's going to increase the compensation for our public safety workers. I don't think anyone has an argument against the need for those that work in public safety, particularly Guam Police Department, to have a raise. But we didn't discuss or debate that during the budget, and we're told that the money's going to come out of the existing budgets and somehow these department and agencies are going to manage and they'll be able to get it through this fiscal year. So I don't know. I mean, we're here supposedly pretending to be appropriators of the public purse, and yet we really have decisions being made outside of us, including the fact, again, that now we're looking at this plan of paying it out of the general fund. We're asking the people of Guam to pay compensation to themselves out of their own pocket. So we could have someone who is a World War II survivor, and now we're going to decide, do we pay them their tax refund, or do we pay their compensation for what they suffered during the war? And that's where, to me, this is a very, I haven't quite settled with this idea that the people of Guam are going to pay themselves. I just don't see how that somehow provides the recognition our people, that those that have survived, that have waited all these years, considering all those that have since died that did not live to see this day. Because really, is it about the money or is it about the recognition of that suffering? So I don't know how we're going to come to terms with that here on how we're going to generate $10 million when we're literally having to, you know, steal from Peter to pay Paul, or vice versa. At some point, you know, the chickens come home to roost, and they're coming now, because folks, you know, aside from the fact I feel the discomfort of this mask every time I look in the mirror and we're out, I see it on, reminds me that we're in a pandemic. And yet money's flowing all over the place, like, oh, we got money, money, money. It's raining money. I've never seen this kind of fiscal irresponsibility, or the idea of wanting to pay out left and right without verifying that the money's going, not just going to be there today, here today, but is it going to be here tomorrow? Because every time I go through Tumon, I'm like, oh my goodness, every time we had a typhoon and our tourism industry was out for a few weeks, we were in crisis. Here we are in year 3, and yet we're operating as if what we have now with this major infusion from Uncle Sam, somehow we're just going to be busy appropriating and spending money like it's going out of style, with no concern whatsoever of the consequence of where we're going to be even a year from now, 6 months from now, when we can't pay the bills while we're busy promising. And in this case, another promise. And I certainly want to see whatever, God, for our survivors to have gotten through to get to this point, by all means, they should be compensated. But for this to be the source of funding, then tell the people of Guam they're not going to get, or they're going to get delayed on their tax refund then. Because this is what this is coming down to from what we already appropriated during the budget that we just went through just a very short period of time ago. So I'm very curious, Mr. Chair. I mean, I'll continue to listen, but I'm just very curious how we're going to resolve this. Because as we did this with Section 30 money, at least with the federal government. And I'd rather look at a source of how do we address that for direct compensation from the federal hands to our people than trying to figure out and play, you know, the shell game with how we're going to get this out of local funds. Thank you. I'll wait for the next round for any further questions or comments, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Parrish, do you have any question for Mr. Byrne?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon to Director Byrne. So I guess the question that I have regards to funding as well. So is it your understanding that the Treasury, the U.S. Treasury, has funds that have been collected from Section 30? Is there still funds that they have that can be used towards the claims, war claims?
Thank you, Senator. We're trying to find out about that. We had an inquiry into Department of the Interior, who get the information from the Department of Treasury, and we haven't got a clear answer yet as to whether there would be any money left in that fund or not.
Okay. Do you have like an estimate of potentially how much that they've been collecting and how much has been dispersed and potentially what's left?
I believe, I can answer the first part. I believe they when you say collected, they restricted payment to us of about 40 million, but I don't know how much they paid out. That's something that Treasury haven't told us yet.
Okay, the other thing is in regards to appeals. Do you foresee, I know this is perhaps beyond your pay grade, but do you foresee potential situations or scenarios where denials would occur besides that one already received a claim?
Sorry, I'm not clear. Are you asking if somebody receives a claim and then somebody else appeals against it?
I guess maybe to simplify the question, do you foresee scenarios where a claim would be denied?
You know, that's up to the Adjudication Committee. If a circumstance that I could envisage, but I can't say this is, I hope this doesn't happen, is that a claimant would make a statement that the Adjudication Committee deems not to be true because of some kind of personal knowledge or some kind of institutional knowledge. But I think we all hope that every claim that's made is needed and genuine, and that we won't have a large number of appeals, if any.
Okay, so yeah, I'm still looking at the appeal section. So basically, if there's an appeal made, the same body that made the decision will be the same body to hear the appeal. And I'm just thinking if there's an alternative to that, because, you know, normally in government, we usually have an appeal sent to a different entity.
Yes, I mean, I guess you could reach that conclusion, but in doing so, you would have to accept that another body has to be set up, and another body would have to receive confidential information, which we're trying to keep confidential here. And there are instances where one body is the adjudicating and appealing body, and that's the way the Foreign Claims Settlement Commission worked. And I guess the bill just assumes that if it worked for that, it's going to work here. But you could come to another conclusion, but I certainly hope that this isn't a major occurrence, and maybe we won't get any appeals.
So can you repeat that regarding what does the Foreign Service do in an appeal, in the case of appeal? What is the rules there?
It's my understanding that the Foreign Claims Settlement Commission, which was the adjudicating committee, also dealt with appeals by claimants who felt that they were wrongly disbarred from a claim. So it was the same body making the primary and appeal adjudication.
Okay, was it the same staff? Because I know sometimes we can hire like a hearing officer, for instance.
Yeah, I don't have that information, Senator, but that could be the case.
do you feel confident now with this new version, the substitute bill, that confidentiality is protected?
It's always challenging to protect confidentiality. You know, we have tax laws, we have HIPAA laws, we have HR laws, all of which require us to keep confidential. By and large, you know, information within the government is kept confidential, you know, which is a challenge because we're an island with people who know or are related to each other. But certainly in DOA, the staff understand the need for confidentiality, and I emphasize that need, and I'm as confident that we can extend that same process to this process as any other.
In this bill, section 13.312, it talks about the Guam Museum shall be the repository of all public records and materials pertaining to war claims. So you'd mentioned that your staff is trained on disclosure. Are there procedures in place to ensure that other agents of the government will be held to that same standard?
Well, I think that's the burden of subparagraph A, is that it mandates the Guam Museum to keep that information confidential.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Director Byrne, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Senator Paris. Madam Speaker, do you have any question for Mr. Byrne?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Byrne, do you see anything in this bill as written that will expand the eligibility for war claims to those who were not eligible for the federal program because of date of death?
Date of death? No, I don't see anything.
All right, and then the appropriation, you suggested that the money is going to come from the general fund, either from the excess of FY21 or what's looking to be revenues over adopted revenues for FY22. Are you still suggesting that either of those is viable?
It's viable if the legislature makes such an appropriation.
All right, so for the FY21 funds, the last estimate was that there was 62 million excess revenues, based on CRER, of course, not audited. 20 million of that, 20 million in that CRER was not accounted for the tax refunds according to Public Law 3654. So that would be 62 minus 20, 42. There was a $20 million shortfall for special funds in FY21. So that will be 62 minus, or the 42 minus another 20, that's about 20 million left. There was the 1.5 million cumulative deficit per the FY 2020 audit. I got these numbers from the, it was a fiscal note for one of the bills that we had heard. So there's a 1.5 million for the cumulative deficit per FY 2020 audit. And then we appropriated these funds for the LEAP program, 25 million. Well, if you add those up, it's a negative balance. So that's what that fiscal note had said at the time, that if we were going to fund from that, it was already negative. So I'm going to say that's a negative balance of 15.2 million. That doesn't include the GUMA bill, the FQ Sanchez Historic Building bill funding, or, but it includes the 10 million for the war claims if we took it from there, right? We'd be negative. So the FY22 funds looks like, so from the last CRER in December, covering December, it looks like 35 million in FY22 revenues over the adopted revenues for the first quarter. Okay, so that's good, 35 million. And remember, we had argued over that during our budget, whether we're going to have, or whether our adopted revenues were too low, and we could allocate more towards refunds or not. So we're looking okay for that, but there's 4.4 million shortfall for the special funds. So that's 35 million minus the 4.4 shortfall for the special funds. Recently, the governor announced raises for the public safety, about 16 million, according to a Post article you're quoted as saying it might cost about 16 million more for those public safety raises. And then I'm certainly hoping we're going to be able to cover teacher raises, right, with this amount, because those have been on hold for quite a while. And then there's the issue of, agency shortfalls that were supposedly going to be funded from ARP funds that may not have been yet. We don't have a firm accounting of that, but there are shortfalls I think we need to ensure are going to be covered. One of them for sure is this, if the Build Back Better Act doesn't pass in Congress, our Medicaid amounts are I think, in jeopardy. We will, after December, be looking at a 55-45 match compared to what they're currently using, or was a 89.1 versus to 10.9%. And with that type of a percentage of the FMAP, we had appropriated, I think, about between 13 and 14 million. So we appropriated the same amount this year, 14 million, but with the change in that FMAP, of course, I think we're not going to be able to cover all of that. So do you feel confident that this 35 million with all of these other things that we're planning to pay, including the raises, is still available?
Yes, Senator. The 35 million is what we've realized to date. I believe based upon the projection, the CRER suggests that the actual excess revenues are going to be more like 50 million. So that's a difference of 15 million that coincides nicely with the amount that we have to set aside for law enforcement. Law enforcement, in the Budget Act, there is money for the Post Commission to
Do a study.
to provide a study. But it would be cruel indeed to do a study and not act on that study. So the administration decided to act in advance of that, and there's good practical reasons for that, as we mentioned in the press conference. But yes, I feel confident that we can disperse this 10 million without going into further deficit.
Right, but you're talking about a 15 million.
Madam Speaker, your time has expired.
Yeah.
You want to go ahead and answer finish your
yeah,
question? Answer the question, please.
Can we use
Which
for
one?
35 million? If we use the 35 million that we actually have versus 50 that we're projecting, wouldn't that be negative at this point with the pay raises?
Yes, but that's why we do the CRER, to determine, we're looking, these are all budgetary figures, so we're looking forward. But yes, if you looked at what we've got now, right, yes, that would be. If we look at and again, like you said, in the budget discussions, the administration felt that the tax revenues were understated. And that would appear to be the case.
All right, thank you, Madam Speaker. Senator Torres, do you have any question for Mr. Byrne?
I'm following intently your discussion about the budget and the ability of the administration and DOA to to fulfill if this should be an appropriation and a mandate upon you. There was also a lot of discussion about set-asides that money's going to, for example, to income tax refunds and the like. But at present, let's just take income tax refunds, which is really a bulk of the money pledged. How has the administration been dealing with income tax refunds to date, like over the past year? And is it your expectation that the government can fulfill that mandate right now and manage that with the existing withholding and the like?
Yes, thank you, Senator. I know that this legislature was very keen that we prioritize tax refunds, and that's exactly what's happened. Since about September or October, we've been issuing tax refunds within weeks, if not days, of filing. We take this very seriously because it's tax refunds, which is one of the major elements that gets back into the economy and keeps the economy running. So that's exactly what has been happening. We're about to embark upon a new tax year with its own set of refunds, but this tax year has the advantage of federal contributions towards EITC and child tax credit, which we've never had before. So the ability of the administration to advance and keep current with tax refunds is well enhanced by these federal contributions. And these federal contributions have no time limit. You know, the current federal law requires them to roll forward from year to year. So the administration, I think your question was how confident is the administration in paying out tax refunds? It's confident.
I bring that up because that is, when we were debating the budget bill, that was the one area that was deemed to have the monies available, any excess monies pledged to the fulfillment of that obligation. So I just wanted to, get from you how that the paying out of refunds has in fact not been a challenge, and that the government has had, for at least a year and going forward, it believes it has sufficient monies to cover that. And there's also an infusion this year, unlike other years where there was an unfunded mandate with the earned income tax credit and the child.
It's the child tax credit.
Child tax credit, CTC.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry, I was losing the acronym. All right, I have no further questions. I just wanted to establish that. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Torres. Senator Duenas, Chris.
Tidus Mazli, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Byrne, for being here this afternoon. I wanted to go back just so that we're clear with when this agreement was first put together. Of course, the original contemplated funding source was federal funds, and obviously that didn't end up coming to fruition. However, we made the decision to use our own money, in essence, which was revenues that we had capped above a certain revenue level for Section 30. And I think the discussion today is kind of a memorialization of discussing, as we like to note to ourselves, let's be just straightforward. Section 30 monies are general fund revenues. We know the source and we know the reason for the reimbursement, but they're for the general fund. I bring this up because, it was widely celebrated when the initial monies were found also in general fund revenues to really jumpstart the program. And basically there was an appropriation from the legislature, an advance, if you will. And I'm thinking that's one of the reasons why we're kind of going along the lines of talking about appropriation of anticipated revenues versus transfer authority. Maybe, and I'll talk to the chairman more about this as we go through the second round, maybe that's kind of what we're doing here as well, again, in the event that we recognize it perhaps in the fiscal year 2023 budget. I don't know if that's going to be something that will be workable. But I think the reality is that on the floor, what you're hearing here is the recognition that, we went down this road. We established that program and gave into the fact that we weren't going to see a congressional appropriation for this, but recognized that it was the right thing to do. And what we're doing now is remedying a class of individuals who missed the deadline or for whatever reason feels that they're still, should have the availability or the ability to seek that justice and recompense. So I'm going to continue to listen to the debate, but I just hope you would be kind of, seen as how you were the captain of the ship, so to say, during that time, and you're still the captain of the ship. So we may look to you to understand maybe some of our back and forth on how we're trying to make sure that these monies are accounted for. And if that was the funding source to begin with, maybe there is some wiggle room there to replicate what was done in time past.
I have a captain, Senator, but might be the navigator.
Certainly. Yes, I'm a merchant marine mariner myself, so well taken, sir. But you're definitely a deck officer, a deck officer that handles the engine, if you will, of the vessel, which is the funding.
Yes, sir.
So I'm going to continue to basically see how we can work through this. I think that this body, recognizes the value of completing what was initiated. We're just struggling with limited resources and with projections. I think that, albeit are very promising, sticking with the priorities of what we believe should be service delivery to the people. So I'll continue to contemplate that. One other question real quickly, Chief Engineer, would be, I just want to make sure we're on the same page, because there's been some representation, and I myself am not exactly sure what we thought the language would be of the bill that passed to create this bill that's here now in front of us. But I want to be clear that I'm hoping it's the understanding of Department of administration overall, that it will be the passage of this bill that will be the framework going forward to be able to do this, because there is no legislation that passes into law unless it passes from this body as per the Organic Act.
Yes, sir. That is correct.
Thank you. I just wanted to put that on the record, Mr. Byrne. I'll continue to listen. But I think there may be some accounting, availability there in terms of recognizing this as an advance. And I'll talk to my colleagues and see if that's something that will go down the road in entertaining. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Duenas. Senator Moylan, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Byrne, going back to the Attorney General's opinion, January 14, 2022, my understanding, he's basically saying, it's up to the governor in depositing it into the rainy day fund as the governor feels necessary. And anything else other than the rainy day fund or the tax refunds, we're going to need legislature approval, which is this bill. And previously it was mentioned by my other colleague here about the expediting by this administration and getting tax refunds paid currently. I'm reading here from the governor's press release on December 5th, 2021. Tax refunds processed and paid within 20 days of filing date. And it gives kudos to Department of Revenue and Taxation and Department of Administration have been working to ensure refunds are processed and paid on a consistent, expedited basis. So without even using this excess money identified, which this bill is trying to use for the purpose of paying out the war claims, this administration with DOA and DRT has been doing what these articles is saying has been doing excellent so far. And you're going to probably continue doing the same process without this current public law that we're saying anything else in excess has to get the appropriations. You're already paying out these tax refunds. So you're going to have more, this is going far on a limb here, you're going to have more money, even more in excess, because you're still paying out your tax refunds. Plus, you're going to be putting 70% into the tax refunds, whatever is over is excess, for future usage. So when are we going to use this money if you've already been paying this consistently with your partnership with DRT? At what point did we use this money? And what this bill is trying to do is use some of that money for the purpose of paying out the war claims. If you can understand my point, what I'm trying to make, please.
Yes, thank you, Senator. As you have said, we've been paying out these tax refunds currently, and it's many a year, certainly beyond my recollection, that this has been achieved by an administration in the way that we're doing it now. For next year, we have the additional advantage, like in answer to Senator Torres's question, that we've got these federal support to some of these mandates which were unfunded and now are funded. So I don't anticipate any change in our ability to pay out tax refunds currently. It's, when we do our cash planning, I think we always say the first charge is debt service, the second is tax refunds. We want to get this money back into the hands of those who are due the refunds, because then it gets back, especially in these circumstances, it gets back into the economy. So I don't anticipate any problem, barring some unforeseen circumstance. And certainly even in these difficult times, and this circumstance wasn't foreseen, we've still been able to pay out these tax refunds, and will continue to do so. And I know the staff at DRT work very hard to process these returns as quickly as they can, so they can pass on to DOA the names and amounts that are due under these tax refunds, and we do what we can to get them out. And we've also started to pay these out electronically too, which gets them out even faster.
I thank you, Mr. Byrne, and I think that 20 days of the filing date and paying out that tax refunds for a clean process is, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Byrne. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Moylan. Colleagues, we've completed round one. We will now proceed to round two. Senator Blas, we'll begin with you. Do you have any question for Mr. Byrne?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't mean to flog a dead horse. It's just that I need to go back to the funding source for payment of claims, page 7. Line 14 says, claims approved by the Adjudication Committee and certified by the chairperson shall first be paid from the 75th Guam Liberation War Claims Fund, as set forth in section 13.206 of Public Law 3662 and established by Public Law 3561. Now here's where my question is going to start from. Subsection B says, upon full expenditure of such funds under subsection A of this section. If I can recall correctly, Mr. Burns, when you were asked as to whether or not there was any monies in that fund, you said there's none, right?
Yes, the full expenditure took place some time ago.
So the full expenditure of upon full expenditure of such funds. So basically it means when it's empty, you go to now an appropriation for, $10 million. Is subsection A then necessary if you claim there is no money in that fund?
Well, the subsection A says that it shall first be paid from the War Claims Fund because that was in the original, or at least that thought was in the original bill. You can choose to eliminate that. You can go straight to Section B if.
No, so
if
I
that
just
feels
need to clarify
comfortable.
this because when you were asked as to whether or not, or how much more was into that fund, you said there's nothing, right?
Yes, it has been expended in the past.
So there is, so basically you have an account, but it's empty.
Yes, sir.
So subsection B here provides that if it's empty, then you go to your next step, right?
Yes, sir.
So then, do we need subsection A?
You know, that's up to you. I wouldn't object to it being eliminated.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Pito Terlai, do you have any question for Mr. Byrne? None. Senator Clint, you have any question? Senator Tony Atta, do you have any questions, sir? None. Senator Brown.
I just wanted to ask the process, how the original claims were paid out by the federal government, because the obvious agenda was it was going to be paid out of Section 30 money. And I was not here at the legislature at the time, but I understand that the government advanced the funds. Were they reimbursed through Section 30? How did all that transact with regards to the previous payments that were made to the war survivors?
All right, thank you, Senator. This is what transpired, that U.S. Congress cannot make a payment unless there's a source of funds. There didn't appear to be a source of funds to pay these war claims. So I guess it was a compromise. It wasn't really a compromise much to our advantage, but at least it got the war claims paid out, is that when we received the Section 30 funds, which is basically, as you understand, a cover over of the tax revenues that are received by the federal government but are earned by Guam, effectively. That was restricted I believe it was over the course of 3 years. And monies that were restricted, that reduction was placed in a fund at U.S. Treasury, and the war claims were paid out of that fund.
But was it a direct payment, or did the government of Guam in any way advance funds to begin the payment process to the war survivors?
No, it was both, right? The federal government, for those that made the claim and met the date, the federal government paid it directly to them. For those that we paid out locally, we paid out the claims to the local claimants who hadn't been paid by the federal government, and then the federal government reimbursed us for those claims. So the money is sort of going round and round and round, but basically the source of funding is ultimately tax revenues that the federal government has that would have been paid back to Guam.
So was there any appropriation of funds originally to put into the pot, so to speak, that was paid on the local side to advance money to the war claimants?
It's 2 years ago, but I believe so.
And then that money was reimbursed by the federal government?
That money was reimbursed by the
And where
federal
did that
government.
money go that was reimbursed? Do you know?
Yes, it filled up we've been talking about this War Claims Fund.
Yes.
The War Claims Fund went negative when we paid it out, and when the money came in, it topped up that fund, so the fund was balanced.
Okay, but if there was an original appropriation by the legislature, the money was advanced, payments were made, then we got a federal reimbursement. And so where did the federal reimbursement money go for the money that was originally appropriated?
Well, the money that was paid out there was nothing in the bank.
Right.
So the money was advanced by the general fund to the War Claims Fund.
That's my point. So if the money was advanced from the local account to this account to pay out the funds, anticipating the receipt of federal funds from Section 30 that was set aside, then where did the money go that was received by the federal government after the fact on the funds that were advanced by the local government?
Could you repeat the question? Sorry,
You
I
were
lost it.
saying that there were a certain amount of funds that were advanced by the local government, right?
Yes,
Because there was a
12.8
negative
million.
at the time anticipating Section 30 money that was reserved. So,
It didn't, sorry to interrupt, it didn't come back through Section 30. It just came back with a payment from the federal government. Even though the ultimate source of funds was the Section 30 money, it came as a direct payment.
so there was no direct, I mean, you know, it's like dropping a pond of water, you know, a drip of water into the big pond. I mean, there was no special account set aside to be reimbursed back?
Yes, the Guam War Claims Fund.
Right, but my understanding is how did we reimburse ourselves back in the government of Guam for the local money that was advanced?
The Guam War Claims Fund reimbursed the general fund. If you like, the general fund lent the money to the War Claims Fund and repaid the money when the War Claims Fund received the money from the federal government.
So there's nothing to prevent us from doing something similar. We can simply set aside a certain percentage of the Section 30 money coming and do the same thing. Because my concern is I want this to go from federal hands to, from federal hands to our hands. I don't like the idea at all of the people of Guam paying themselves for war claims.
But Senator, they did that anyway because the section, because the federal government effectively reduced the Section 30 money that it would have paid us. It's really coming from local
Mr. Burns,
funding.
I totally understand that, but
Anyway.
at the same time, in principle, it was set aside specifically intended for, and I don't agree. I think most people did not agree ultimately with the idea of using Section 30 money that the people of Guam would have gotten anyway. But, you know, this is where we're at. And I would rather see some means of the whole, even if it's symbolic, I would rather have that be paid for through that process because it's coming from federal coffers than to simply have the people of Guam pay themselves. There's just something morally wrong about that to me. I don't think we can receive recognition when our own people are paying themselves for suffering that they didn't inflict upon themselves. Trust me, 20 or 30 years ago, this would have been just a totally preposterous idea. And I'm even more dumbfounded in this time of, because I don't believe all this free money that's flowing around is going to last. I really don't. Everything, as they say, goes up, comes down. And while we seem to be just, you know, dancing in the rain with all this money coming in, there's going to be a drop-dead date on it. And when it comes, all the colleagues that are busy here appropriating money left and right, I hope you're here to account when the money isn't going to be there, when we're having to roll back or we're having to cut hours to employees, or all of a sudden critical services can't be provided, because this is a world of illusion to me right now, what we're going through. So I'm just looking at that probably as an option that would even make it palatable for me to want to vote for this, because I have no problem, you know, wanting to compensate our war survivors that did not meet that one-year deadline. As I mentioned, I think that timeline was relatively short for them to apply after all these years. But again, the idea, because then we're just paying money, then we're just buying people. I hate that idea. I really hate that idea. And I've worked with, as Senator Blas has, directly with many of these war claimants over the years. It took a long road to get here. It didn't miraculously just happen all of a sudden overnight. It was a long and winding process to get to where we are. So if that might be a concept to look at that might make it acceptable to others here that maybe feel the very same way, that money should come through the federal source in some way, versus it simply be we're paying out of the general fund. Because looking at the figures, I don't know where this money's going to come from. And while we're paying, you know, all these tax refunds and, you know, dancing that we're paying it, the only reason it's being paid as quickly is because the money's there right now. It may not always be, and may not always be at this speed. It isn't happening because certain players right now have magic in their hands and are making it happen. So I just want to bring that up because I think that might be another option to look at to make this even palatable to vote for a funding source for this bill. Thank you, Mr. Burns. Now, you're in a tough position being the only rep being brought down here for this, but I appreciate you responding to my question. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
That's okay, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Paris. Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Byrne, where is the LEAP source of funding? will that be paid from FY21 excess revenues or FY22 revenues?
It could come from either.
Where are you intending to take it? Haven't you made these, hasn't the money been given to Gita already?
We've been paying out some. I don't
Okay,
think we haven't
so-
been paying out.
So how are you
total
accounting
amount.
for that? Where's it coming from?
It's coming from the general fund balance,
So,
which is what the legislation says.
pardon, I can't hear you.
Which is what the legislation says.
Right. And so I want to know, it's not clear there whether it's coming from FY21 excess that you always talk about or FY22 revenues from the CRER.
And I understand that was what was intended, that it would come from the general fund balance.
All right. Well, can you clarify for us? Will it be accounted for in the FY21 excess revenue as in the audit for FY21?
No, but it's being paying it out in 22, so I won't be able to clarify it until we get to the 22 audit.
Is it possible that you will be using FY21 excess revenues to pay for the leap?
It's possible.
Okay, and you won't commit to us to tell us today whether that's going to be the source of funding or not?
No, because that wasn't what the legislation intended.
The legislation gives you flexibility, but you're
Yes.
paying it now, so I'd like to know what's your source.
I'm not
Are
in-
you
I'm
using
not in that
then
position at the moment to
revenue
tell you.
from FY22 that was not appropriated?
No,
All right, then.
we're using the general fund balance as the appropriation in the legislation says.
Okay, I don't want to go around in circles again, Mr. Byrne, when, I'd like to just get a very clear picture. You're giving us two options for source of funds. You're saying you don't want it to come from transfer from existing appropriations. You want it to come from either excess 21 or the FY22 revenues that are showing in excess of adopted revenues. But you won't be specific as to where the leap's going to be paid or where you're going to want to take this one from. But I think it's fair that we account for, how much we're going to have left, and it depends on which source you're taking it from. What about the funds that were supposed to be reimbursed to the Guam Liberation War Claims Fund? I know you've explained why you did not reimburse them, despite the law saying that it should be reimbursed, because of, again, your semantics that it was never transferred there like the original law proposed. You loaned it to the fund. That's what you said you did. That's not what the law said to do. It said to transfer it into the War Claims Fund and reimburse it, and that it should not be touched without legislative appropriation. So I just want to know if we are going to if we're going to appropriate 10 million and I want it to go to the War Claims Fund again, and I'd like to ensure that if it's not used, that it remains there without appropriation. What language would you recommend to ensure that it's not used and that it remains there until further appropriated by the legislature?
As I understand it, I don't know that I really want to recommend anything. As I understand it, this legislation appropriates it from the general fund. You can appropriate it to another fund, or you can not appropriate it from, but it's still an appropriation of 10 million. So I don't really understand the burden of your question.
Really? If we appropriate the 10 million, we don't want it to be used after that for any other purpose. We want it to remain in the fund until fully expended, unless further appropriated by the legislature.
Well, the section C says funds appropriated under this section shall not lapse and shall continue to be available until fully expended.
Yes, for this program. But if they're not, I want to make sure they're not used for any other program, like the reimbursements from the federal government were used to reimburse the general fund, contrary to what we said in our previous law. You told us you've got the better language to ensure that that doesn't happen, so I'm asking you for your
Well,
recommendation.
I guess my recommendation, being a simple person, would merely to say funds appropriated on this section shall not lapse and continue to be available until fully expended on this program.
I don't know, that doesn't sound, okay, Mr. Byrne. How do we keep the money in the War Claims Fund without you taking it out without appropriation?
Well, this is a different situation, Senator. I want you to understand
But if we
this.
appropriate it to the War Claims Fund instead of to the Department of Administration, because we don't want that kind of shenanigans to happen again, I want to ensure that it stays in that fund.
I think I would take exception to your word shenanigans. This is a different situation. In the first situation, there was no money. We had to appropriate it and then get reimbursed. In this situation, the money is being appropriated from the general fund. So it's not the same thing. But
Right.
you could make up your mind to put whatever word. You asked me for a suggestion as to what wording, and I made a suggestion. And
For the special fund, but you're not giving us a recommendation for the language for the special fund?
No, I'm not. I don't. Special funds, we've already got 82 special funds.
Okay.
I'm not terribly keen on dealing with,
All right, so you said that the
unnecessarily.
CRER is projecting 50 million excess revenues over adopted revenues for FY22, and so then we should be banking on that 15 million excess revenues, not just the 35 that we've actually received, and account for shortfalls and special funds. And that 50 million, though, is not projected to come in immediately. It's projected for the entire year, right?
That's correct. And
Well, I'm
claimants
hoping,
have a year to make a claim.
pardon?
Claimants have a year to make a claim.
Right, but I'm hoping we're not going to wait a year to give them their payment. I'm hoping we're going to be able to pay them immediately, and that's why we're trying to find funds and not just talk about things that we might receive at the end of this fiscal year that no one really knows right now. Hopefully we do, but I want to make sure that if we can get the claim forms in, that we can pay them immediately. So,
Well, I certainly would intend to pay these out as soon as I possibly can, just like we do with the tax refunds.
yes, and that is a good point. And our tax refunds, we are paying out tax refunds in part because the legislature has not over appropriated. And that's what I'm trying to ensure here by ensuring we can account for the general funds that we have, the general funds that we are expecting, the excess general funds from the last fiscal year. And if you can help us account for that, which is, your role, then we will not over appropriate, and we will not go back to what we used to be doing and
Speaker,
why we are behind in
your time has
refunds in the
expired.
first place. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Do you have something to add?
I didn't ask a question, Mr. Chair.
Yes,
The question I asked, he did not answer, so I was just saying my,
I believe I did.
pardon?
Okay, we'll move on.
Chair?
Senator Torres. Senator Duenas.
This is Asi, Mr. Chairman, for the second round, and welcome back, Chief Engineer. So I've, in discussions with my colleagues here on the floor, this kind of reminds me, Mr. Chairman, of a prior fiscal year where there was a feeding frenzy on the Tourist Attraction Fund, and so I went down to see one of the good friends of mine at BBMR, and I said, well, it looks like we're on a road here to maybe over-appropriate. There's a priority here that's been identified. What are your thoughts? He said, well, whatever comes in first, that's what's going to get paid. And too bad for the guys that didn't come in, or when they come in after, and there's simply not enough funds there. That's how they do it. They write you a note that says funds not available. I mean, I'm going down that road because I've talked to several of my colleagues, and I just want to to put on notice our good friend, the director, Mr. Byrne, that I plan on introducing an amendment that will do what the speaker is talking about, which is to utilize the fund that I think is appropriate, which is the fund that was originally established, and to also identify the fund advance that we're proposing here to be offset by the fiscal year 2023 Section 30 funds. I think that's an appropriate way to do this. We've mirrored the program as it came about on when we decided that we were going to pay ourselves. We are going to essentially absolve, if you will, what was over many, many years thought to be a federal obligation that we could have availed of resources. That history is behind us, it's storied. But I think that is the proper way to account for this. We did that from the beginning. We saw an opportunity, and to basically answer the question of my colleague earlier, the question, it was an advance. We know that. That was an advance appropriation from this legislature in anticipation of when the program was being established. I think it's only right that we stick to that for not only accounting reasons, but for accountability reasons. So when we come to that portion, Mr. Chairman, and I'm going to beg the understanding, or at least if it passes, that will be the funding source, if that amendment is able to pass. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Sejus Masi.
Thank you, Senator Dueñas. Senator Moreland?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sir, for the War Claims Fund, when we did have money in there, it came from Department of Treasury identifying where that money is coming from the Section 30 funds. It was a percentage after, I forget now, was it 68 million or 58 million? If you can verify that, please.
Actually, Senator, we don't know. When we got reimbursed, and if I can just follow up on Senator Dueñas' point, the whole purpose of that prior legislation was to make an advance payment of the war claims because the federal government wasn't making it. So we made it on their behalf, basically. But the source of funds was still the same. They didn't really, something like, they didn't identify to us, just like I think the speaker is noting. They didn't identify to us the source of the funds. We knew that they had restricted Section 30 funding in order to build up those funds, but they didn't specifically tell us that. They just said they were paying us.
And they continue to take the source of the funding from this Section 30 as they were eventually paying out the war claimants from that Section 30 above a certain amount they were taking out, and they would identify that to Department of Interior. So when the governor received the Section 30 big check presentation, it was minus so much money appropriated after 68 or 65 million that went into this war claims fund. Is that correct?
That's correct.
For some reason, Department of Treasury either was late in identifying to the Department of Interior, or it doesn't mean they cannot do that once again, because we haven't relinquished our authority for what they were originally assigned to do. I don't know if the original law or the one they were paying out, if everybody was already paid out yet or not. So that doesn't prevent the Department of Treasury for, again, taking a percentage out to pay out those that signed or filed in time. Is that correct? Can you please explain that?
Yes, maybe you could look at it the other way around. We decided to pay out these sums first because the federal government didn't have a statutory authority to pay it all out And when they got that statutory authority, they reassumed paying these sums out and reimbursed us for the amounts that we had paid out.
Okay, and I'm totally in agreement with that. It's clear and understood. I'm just thinking our Section 30 money is, so we're looking at that amount to increase as the buildup continues.
Yes.
So there's nothing to prevent the Department of Treasury, again, to what the original war claim payments, those that qualify and submitted your application on time, to continue doing that until all those that qualify. This bill is just for those that miss the time. That doesn't mean that there are still others there that are still being adjudicated.
Yes, my understanding, Senator, is there are a few, but basically I believe that the Foreign Claims Settlement Commission thinks that they've paid out the bulk, if not almost all, of the claimants, because I mean those that didn't miss the date, and that's what we're dealing with here.
Okay, so if the Department of Interior, the Department of Treasury takes a percentage out of a growing amount of Section 30 money, with this item A on page 7, if they do deposit money into it, we could still use that Section 30 for what this bill is trying to do. Is that correct in your point?
But Treasury didn't deposit money into that fund. They just gave it to us and we deposited in that fund. So yes, I mean, you're right. You could put the money into any fund or into the general fund. But the result really is the same. We're going to pay out 10 million to war claims survivors, and if there's any left to descendants, whichever way you put it. When you look at the audit, you'll see money flowing from one fund to another. That line at the bottom that has transfers in. But if we can simplify it, please, let's try and simplify it.
All right. So if the administration so wishes to relay that to the Department of Interior, maybe they can still come out of Section 30 if they set aside based on if this bill was to pass, utilizing A and then utilize B in that priority.
Yes, they could, but as I say, I'm not really anticipating much more money coming out of U.S. Treasury, and therefore much more money being restricted in the Section 30 funding.
Okay, I see what you're saying, because otherwise we'll get the whole Section 30 money will go to this administration and goes into the general fund.
Yes, and it goes into the general fund. That's correct, Senator.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, sir, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Moreland. That concludes the second round. The last round, of course, will be for amendments. So with that, I'm going to call for a recess until 9 a.m. tomorrow. Please get all of your amendments in. This will allow you time to complete the amendments. Please make sure you get them in. We recess until 9 a.m. tomorrow.